Well, let me welcome everybody to our session. I think we're starting on time. And this is the second session of the Knight Commission spring meeting, and we are broadcasting from Indianapolis, Indiana. So welcome all. We are joined by a panel of experts who will discuss, first of all, the impact of the current environment on collegiate sports in the Olympic sports ecosystem. And I use the word Olympic sports, although it is broader than that, in all of the sports that we're involved in. And secondly, how broad-based sports opportunities can be protected and continue to thrive on our campuses, which I think in just brief conversations with our panelists really is something that there's just a very sincere and deep belief in that concept. Before we open it up, I did want to just remind people that our commission formed a task force at the start of this year to identify how our commission can advance ideas and further collaborate with stakeholders to help preserve athlete opportunities in a variety of sports during this time of incredible change. And the group includes members with high levels of connectivity to Olympic sports and is co-chaired by members Commissioner Beth Brooke, and Bob Bowlesby, who could not be here today with us, but who has been involved virtually in our meeting. So we're trying to, through this particular group, is to serve a role as an independent organization to convene leaders to develop and advance solutions. We don't try to just identify problems, but actually what we're interested in are potential solutions. And being able to convene a group like this group and talk about these together, we find benefits both thinking of the commission, and I hope it'll benefit your thinking too. This group that we formed hosted think tank sessions with leaders from the USOPC, college coach associations, Division I administrators, Olympic athletes, and other stakeholders to learn about current initiatives and to generate new ideas. We will continue this work and look forward to growing these partnerships and relationships with all of these individuals and other groups. Some of the panelists participated in these think tank sessions, and we appreciate their leadership. Thank you. On this critical issue that's so critical to college athletes and to universities and to the future, frankly, of the United States Olympic sporting movement. If you think about the collegiate Olympic sports and what they provide, we look at them as providing really sort of two benefits. One, they do indeed help develop future Olympic medal winners. And as Americans, I think that most people find that to be sort of the ultimate honor for our country and for the values that we stand for. And they do this by linking the pathway from participation in youth sports, college sports, to the podium of Olympic sports. More broadly, college sports provide broad-based participation opportunities for thousands of young people who may never make an Olympic team, but who benefit from these educational and leadership opportunities through basically participation in college sports. In 2024, 85% of Division I college athletes participated in a sport other than men and women's basketball and FBS football, 85%. So that shows you the actual volume of the college students who are actually participating in sports on our campuses. I wanted to just give you a few reminders as we begin this session. First of all, the session is being recorded, and the recorded video and other materials from this session will be available through the Knight Commission's website at knightcommission.org. The Night Commission members, we would ask, and the panelists, we would ask to use their microphones when speaking so that the virtual audience can hear you, and that is the only way they will be able to hear you. I'm going to very briefly introduce the panelists who will each give their remarks in the order that I introduce them. And after we hear from all of the panelists, we'll open up the floor among the commission for questions from commission members. First is Rocky Harris. Welcome. He's the Chief of Sport and Athlete Services for the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. Second, Bubba Cunningham, Board of Directors, USOPC, and Director of Athletics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Next, Max Siegel. You're not sitting correctly in order. We'll adjust. Max Siegel of the USA Track and Field, and finally, and Jaime Gordon, CEO of the American Volleyball Coaches Association. And then finally, Victoria Jackson, sports historian and clinical associate professor of history at Arizona State University. So welcome all. And all of you have been, we've given suggested timeframes for your remarks. And so I think what I would do, Rocky, is to start with you and invite you to go ahead and make some remarks at this time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pam. Thanks to the Night Commission for having us here today. And really important topic to me, obviously, but also to our country. And I think that's why the work you're doing is critically important to the future of sport in our country. And there's really no better time than now. This is going to be the most transformational, important decade of sport for Olympics and Paralympics in our country, with 2 home games coming up. We have the Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games in Los Angeles in 2028, and the Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games in Salt Lake in 2034. And so we have this opportunity now to expose the next generation of athletes, of citizens, to sports that they may not have been exposed to for 20 plus years since we last hosted the Games. And so for us, this is the time that we should be focused on that. And instead, we're focused on the future model of sport in our country and how that will work and with the impact that will have on Team USA. This was, something that's really important to our country too. I'd say Team USA and the success of Team USA is nonpartisan. Whether you're on the left or right, it's the one unifying thing in our country at a time when we're less connected and less unified than we've been in a long time. And so this is something that to us is more meaningful than just being at the top of the podium. That's really important to us. And we've shown success on that metric over the course of our history. We're the most successful Olympic and Paralympic program in the world. We've won more than 1,000 more medals than the next best country in the Olympics and Paralympics. So we've had a lot of success. And the reason for that is the model that our country operates in, the education-based system in sport that allows athletes from all backgrounds to have access to sport that in other countries they don't have access to. And we're also the only major National Olympic and Paralympic Committee that gets 0 federal funding. I know Charlie mentioned that, but I want to make sure that's very clear to this group. The amount of my budget for the Paris Games last year, this includes supporting all the national governing bodies, athlete stipends, was less than the University of Texas's athletics department budget last year. So we have a very small budget and we do a lot of work with it. So we rely on the system to be able to drive the success of Team USA. And the success is carried on. In Paris last year, we won more medals at the Olympics than we've ever won at a non-home games, and the most since 1984. So even more than the 96 games in Atlanta. So the success of our athletes really is obvious. But that's right now, there's a threat to that. And we all know that the system, the college athletic system, drives a lot of our success. The fandom is growing too. So if you look at the Paris Olympics, there's about an 82% increase in broadcast viewership from Tokyo to Paris, 31% at the Paralympics, improvement from the last game. So we're seeing women's sports growing in our country, from professional leagues to collegiate athletics to even within our system. So right now we're seeing, again, our world growing, while one part of our system is in some ways saying that it's not as important because it doesn't drive direct revenue because they haven't figured out how to maximize that revenue yet. 84% of our Olympic medalists competed in college athletics. 84% of Team USA's medalists. 54% of our Paralympics competed collegiately. So this is both an impact to Olympic and Paralympic sport. What the decisions that are made in the next few years, and that's the important work that the Knight Commission can do, is help have a group that's thinking about the future of Olympic sport and not just thinking about the commercial model within the NCAA. And so, I'll be here to talk about some solutions. I think what I'm excited about today is we've identified the problem. The problem's obvious. It's for us to start thinking about solutions that don't impact the future generations of athletes in our country and the direct impact of not leveraging 2 home games in our country and being distracted, quite frankly, with something that could dismantle the Team USA. So I'll pass it on to Bubba now for your comments.
Thanks, Rocky. And I too want to thank the commission for inviting me here. What a complete honor it is. I became the athletic director at North Carolina in 2011. And before I got there, I had a conversation with Father Hesberg, one of the founding members of the Knight Commission. And he said, when you get to Chapel Hill, make sure you see my good friend, Bill Friday. So when I was on campus, I met with Mr. Friday and got to talk to him about all the things going on in college athletics when they were on the Knight Commission. And it was commercialization, it was academic integrity, it was all the things that we're still talking about today, some 30 years later. So as I was preparing for today, I went back to my files and I found all of the printed reports from the Knight Commission back from 91, 92, 93, 2001. And quite frankly, those have been the foundation of my leadership in a couple of different schools where I've been the athletic director. Presidential control, academic integrity, financial integrity, and certification of operations. And in that period of time and working throughout college athletics, we've had a lot of changes. But what we've done as an institution, as an NCAA or the governance structure, we've changed a lot of our rules through legislation. But what we're seeing now is an accelerated pace of change through litigation. And as Charlie mentioned a little bit earlier, that the House settlement is likely to happen maybe this week. And Rocky talked about, how the Olympics unifies the country. Well, we were able to unify the Supreme Court in 2021 on a 9-0 decision, maybe not popularly. And now we've been able to engage all 3 branches of government. We've got the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch all trying to get into college athletics. And I think that is a concern for all of us. But I also think we're going to need those parts of government to help us get to a better space as we try to navigate the future. Where we are today with the settlement, which could come today, and it was talked about earlier, the recommendation for the damages or the agreement with the damages has been 75, 15, 5, and 5. 75% of the money going to football, 15% to men's basketball, 5% to women's basketball, and 5% to everyone else. And so if I start thinking about that, of the 70 schools that are in the Power 5, there's going to be about 130 on each campus that play football, men's basketball, women's basketball. And then you'll have a handful of others that are going to participate in some of the Olympic sports, whether it's volleyball or running track or playing baseball or playing ice hockey. And some of those students will participate in the revenue share. And that's going to have a significant impact on the future of what we do. The decisions that we make on campus are going to have implications to participation as well. So when I add up all those numbers of the football, basketball players in those particular sports, that's only about 10,000 students. And we have over 500,000 that compete in intercollegiate athletics. So what's it mean for the other 490,000 as we start to implement the changes required through this court settlement? And I am concerned about what that's going to do for us. So I start to think about how do we continue to build the pyramid? And on the board, we've got the pyramid of participation is what I call it. And maybe we should start thinking about the educational model that starts with youth sports. And as our youth sports participation, we have about 4 million people participating in youth sports. And then the pyramid gets smaller as you go up. And I'm concerned that we're going to start losing participation for those folks that are competing at the youth level. And then what is the impact of Title IX going to be on the future? I think we may have a collision with two different federal laws between Title IX and Title VII. But if you look at this pyramid of participation, you see that we're working in a university environment where participation is based on competitive equity and gender equity. And you see about half of the participants in the high school level and the collegiate level are women. But when you get to a professional model, there's less than 10% in the team sports in the United States that are women. And I think that becomes a challenge for us as we try to professionalize college athletics. We are going to bump into additional legal challenges as we move forward. While we operate a very expensive operation at the Division I level, we are still part of the academy, and we need to maintain our position within the academy. At Carolina, we've been fortunate that we've been able to maintain a broad-based program, and we offer 28 teams with about 850 student athletes participating. But with the new roster limits, we will be limited to about 735 participants in our 28 teams. But on the plus side, as Charlie indicated, we currently have NCAA limits of 330 scholarships, but with the new roster limits, we'll have 730 opportunities to provide scholarships for our student athletes. And I think that is a real positive thing that we have working for us. In addition to these participation numbers, I do think we have to look at the commercial activity as it continues to accelerate and figure out how we can take the increased revenue and continue to provide opportunities. The things that are most important to us at Carolina is what Charlie mentioned. We want to maximize the opportunities for kids to come to college and get a great education. We want to ensure that those opportunities, we provide them a great education while they're there, whether they want to pursue the Olympics, whether they want to pursue a professional model, or they just want to get a degree and move on into their professional life. So that's what we're trying to guarantee. We're fortunate enough that the state and the university system has allowed us to do that, and we're getting additional support. And when I go back to the 1991 Knight Commission, it talked about creating revenue, but it also talked about additional support so that not all of the pressure to generate revenues on the sports that generate the money, football and basketball, to support everybody else. It allows for institutional funding. So the priorities that we do have, and I think if we're trying to solve a very complex problem, we need to work on it like it's a Rubik's Cube. Every time we make a change in one of the faces of the cube, it is going to affect the other. I put this presentation together about 10 years ago, but I think it's very relevant today. The faces of that cube are education, opportunities, the university mission, the governance structure, health and well-being of our student athletes, and then talk about the economics that support your values and what you want to do. So as I mentioned, at the University of North Carolina, our mission is that we educate and inspire through athletics. I do believe it is our responsibility to provide a great education, and our students are incredibly inspirational to us that work on a campus. They're inspirational for younger generations to watch. They're inspirational for those that have come before them. And I think we need to do everything we can to maintain those maximum opportunities. I do think it's a bit ironic that we're 30 years later after the Knight Commission started, still talking about the same things. But I think Mr. Friday and Father Hesberg would both be proud that the conversation is continuing, and we want to continue to maximize those opportunities. And I think it's well worth it. So I do appreciate the time being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bubba. Very, very, very well done. Jamie, would you like to phone?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And again, thanks to the commission for allowing me this time to share some thoughts. I appreciate the leadership that I'm alongside, and especially with Bubba and the commitment that a school like North Carolina has made to broad-based sports sponsorship, along with the comments that President Baker made about the importance of the experiential benefits of participating in intercollegiate sports. I also think, though, it's important to recognize that we are currently facing a slow dismantling of those opportunities. It was referenced that 21 sports, actually since the announcement of the House settlement, there have been 32 programs that have been dropped at the Division I level. That represents 966 opportunities lost. Then if we add St. Francis making the decision to drop all 22 of their programs from Division I to Division III, that adds another 600 plus opportunities gone already. I've also had direct conversations with athletics directors and administrators, and there are more planned cuts that have just not been announced yet. But I do believe that we still have time to act to both protect and maintain these opportunities. Over the past 20 years, intercollegiate athletics has gone through massive changes. Conference realignments, billion-dollar media deals, NIL, transfer portal, and now we face revenue share. But yet something remarkable has stayed consistent all through that time. And that's the financial balance that institutions have made between football and basketball and all other sports. So when we look at operational expenses, this refers to the ongoing program-specific costs of running a sport. Okay, this is coaching salaries, team travel, equipment, game operations, recruiting, and scholarships. They do not represent NIL deals, the future revenue share, facility upgrades, or any other operational costs. Now, think about athletics budget like a pie chart. And I know the Knight Commission loves pie charts, okay? It has grown over those 20 years since 2003 by 400%. But the sliver or the piece of the pie that has been allocated to Olympic sports has stayed remarkably the same. And that's consistent based on whatever classification of institutions. And so this is how the numbers look based on EADA data. The median FBS schools in 2003 invested 65% of their operational costs on football and basketball, 35% on all the other sports. At the FCS level, and then 20 years later, those percentages are remarkably the same, 34% to all other sports, 66% to football and basketball. At the FCS level, those numbers are about 45% to Olympic sports. And then at our non-football sponsoring institutions, it's 62% to the Olympic sports. And that's because they don't have the expense of football. It's only measured to basketball. So the risk that we face now, though, is that without some intentional protections, schools will follow the incentives, and those incentives put Olympic sports at great vulnerability, with what we're seeing with the sports that have been dropped. So imagine if public schools started to drop the sciences and the arts because they were incentivized by reading and math scores based on their funding. That would be a crisis. And this that we're facing is no different. So our proposal, and when I say our, I'm speaking to other coaches associations that are trying to figure out how do we continue to protect and maintain this model, is to, number one, protect the resources and codify those ratios that have been the foundation of institutions like North Carolina and others that have valued that balance. It's not a hierarchy, there's still that separation of the expenses that go into football and basketball, but let's codify those ratios. And keep in mind, this is operational, not future expenses of rev share. The second is to also protect the sports sponsorship minimums of 16 for FBS and 14 for all others. I am optimistic, but I am very concerned that those sport minimums are at risk. We saw it during other financial strains in COVID, and we expect that this will continue as well. So we need to protect those opportunities. And Again, this is not a radical shift in the way that we've operated. Even the NCAA and their distribution models incentivizes things like sports sponsorships through the Sports Sponsorship Fund, grant and aids for student athletes in the Grant and Aid Fund. So this is how we have operated. I do believe that there will be some pushback to this. Especially no one likes the idea of mandates. And a big buzzword right now are unfunded mandates. And this is not what that is. What we're trying to introduce here is a new requirement, just identifying these are the historical norms, and this can be a way that we can continue to operate moving forward. Another concern is that institutions need autonomy to respond to their own unique considerations or circumstances, and that's valid. Again, this doesn't restrict how you spend your money between those spaces. It just says, hey, we want to make sure that it's balanced. And then, yes, there is significant financial stresses that people like Bubba are facing, and I get it. But without these standards, we really put ourselves at risk. If I'm driving from here to Chicago, there are no guardrails on the road because it's fairly safe. If I go from San Francisco to LA, there are guardrails all over the place because it's a dangerous path. We need to put up those guardrails at intercollegiate athletics right now so that we don't inadvertently drive ourselves off the cliff here. So thank you for that time.
Thank you very much. Next.
I too would like to thank you all for inviting me here for this very important conversation. And as I reflected on what my remarks might be, I thought it was important to kind of give you all my lens. This is a very robust conversation that's happening in my house. I am a recovering lawyer that's been involved in media, entertainment, sports, professional, collegiate, and Olympic for my entire career. I had the privilege and the honor of just returning from my son's law school graduation at Georgetown, watching him as the commencement speaker. He was a Division I football player at Notre Dame. While I was in DC, I got to visit with my daughter, who's a Division I volleyball player at Howard University. And my son being involved in all the NIL movement, the president's sack, you can imagine that there's a robust conversation around the dinner table at home about what's happening in college athletics right now. But what resonated for me the most as I watched my kids and other student athletes this weekend was the importance of athletics to the student experience and developing the whole person and creating opportunities for them. I have the distinct privilege of leading USA Track and Field for the last 14 years. And in that ecosystem, we have a really unique business model. 70% of our revenue comes from corporate sponsorship, not membership dues, no government support. And we also have a pretty complex governance structure. So we're constantly trying to navigate good governance, maintaining the integrity of the sport, creating commercial opportunities to sustain programming. We have over 8,000 events that we sanction in a year, including the Chicago Marathon, the Boston, New York Marathon. We have a very robust youth sports program, our largest membership, youth. The events that have the most economic impact for us are the Junior Olympics. We field the most competitive international team in the world, having the #1 track and field team in the world. And then we have a unique structure where many, if not most of our athletes are products of the collegiate system or collegiate athletes. And many of our podium coaches are college coaches. Our former president, Vin Lanana, and I have spoken quite extensively about what saving Olympic sports does for access to education. In the Olympic movement, track and field, with our athletes are the most diverse, with the administration are the most diverse. And I think about on a daily basis, if these opportunities vanish, so many students who that is a pathway to education will be negatively impacted by it. But I wanted to spend a lot of my time with the questions or later on talking about solutions. I do think that collaboration is critical. There are opportunities that we have embarked upon, whether it's facility access, hosting championships on collegiate campuses, jointly going after, non-traditional funding. It's time for us in today's age to be innovative, to maintain the integrity of the education experience, to maintain the integrity of the governance structures. But at the same time, we have had to think very creatively on how we continue to grow our resource base, fund programs, and provide these opportunities for the people who participate in our sport. So I thank you for inviting me to the discussion today, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Max. Victoria, welcome.
Bubba, are you sure you're not part of the history faculty? You're like walking around with primary sources. That's amazing. You just made my historian heart explode. It was the coolest thing that you brought those. Thank you. When Amy Pricko and the Knight Commission asked me to speak today, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. It was tempting to give a history lesson, but Bubba kind of beat me to it. A history lesson in the manner similar to how I opened the public hearing of the Commission on the State of the U.S. Olympics and Paralympics in 2023 to show the dire necessity of overhauling and improving the American sports ecosystem. But in our limited time, I'm mindful that historical insights explaining how we got here aren't as useful to this group as future-oriented policy recommendations. I do have what I think is a pretty good track record of launching ideas out into the universe, a white paper presenting the case for Power Conference football player media rights revenue sharing, a moonshot that the monies from a federal tax on sports betting be run through colleges to support Olympic and Paralympic development, a call that investors in women's professional sports also direct that creative energy and capital into women's college sports, and most recently, a roster limits workaround bringing back JV teams. I've been doing this with the hope that someone will take these ideas and run with them. As a beneficiary of college sports at a time when the system structurally was inflicting harm upon others, I've long felt a responsibility to help fix it. And I also do not work in the sports industry directly, so I can think outside the box in ways that oftentimes others cannot. In other words, I think it's a good idea to bring in people like me outside the system, but intimately familiar with it to help reimagine it. So instead of looking back at the past 50 years, let's talk about what it's going to take to build something now with the goal of it being healthy, efficient, and optimized, and serving its mission 50 years into the future, 50. Because if there is one takeaway from today's meeting, it's a call to constructive action and a refusal to become frozen by doomsday fatalism. We need top to bottom, or rather bottom to top, openness to change and willingness to try new things. Local problem solving and imaginations are as vital as decision making at a national level. With the US hosted Olympic and Paralympic Games on the horizon, the summer ones in LA in 28, as Rocky mentioned, of course, we even have a time-sensitive goal to rally around, spur us into action, and use as an advocacy tool. We could spend time lamenting the fact that we don't have a sports minister or sports ministry in this country, but instead I think we should recognize the perks of our scattershot system. Because for all our inefficiencies, the good news is that the weird sports ecosystem we have in the United States has many good pieces and parts to work with. We are a country that has a law mandating that the bodies in charge of Olympic and Paralympic sport hold a dual mission of serving both top of pyramid elite development and the much larger base of grassroots participation, aka sports for all. We are a country that has built school sports infrastructure grounded in the principle that sports are education programs. And we are also a country that has historically had robust educational civil rights laws mandating equitable access and opportunities to our education programs, including school sports. We are a big country with a big population that has built thousands of colleges and universities that collectively make up the best higher education system in the world, and one with the mission of public service. Our sports ecosystem might be a patchwork of overlapping bodies, and yes, there has been dysfunction, but gosh, does this system contain all sorts of good and noble ideas. Even its convoluted nature could be seen as a benefit. Our system's lack of rigidity creates a flexibility and even a nimbleness. We need to think about how to activate the opportunities our system presents and take advantage of our ability to introduce new ideas. While we do this, we must not operate as if college sports in the United States exist in a vacuum. Constant consideration of how U.S. college sports sit within global sports development pathways and global sports ecosystems has to be part of the reimagination exercise. And a corresponding awareness of U.S. higher education's place in the world is required too. It is time for all the college sports that are not football to begin work at designing their sports without the presence of football or football money as part of the calculation. Maybe once the power conference football settles into a fully professionalized model with 50-50 revenue sharing, schools will continue to direct a portion of their 50% towards the subsidization of other sports. That's cool. Maybe football at the top will be spun off, and part of the deal negotiated to accommodate that will be facilities rental payments and direct designated annual investments in other sports. Also cool. Maybe the NFL will come around to the idea that they've enjoyed streamlined player development and scouting thanks to the work of institutions of higher education that have saved them billions of dollars over the years, and the league will feel a duty to allocate a percentage of league revenues to Team USA development, with the monies to be run through college sports. That's a long shot, but it'd be cool. If something football money related happens, that's all well and good. But for too long, we've had an unsustainable reliance on football that has made us complacent. And football considerations should not be part of the energies devoted to figuring out the future of college Olympic and Paralympic sports. The best approach to tackling this project is sport by sport, with each sport taking charge to determine its future. I'm a track and field person. Actually, the last 2 times I was in Indy were for USATF Outdoor National Championships in 2006 and 2007, so it was fun to run this morning, although it was pouring, so that wasn't as fun. I want to work with my track and field people on what we need to do to make our great sport self-sufficient and a sport in service of community. Volleyball has people like Jamie. Soccer and tennis have been hard at work, and that's awesome. Essential here is that we share ideas across sports, and I'm glad to know that this already has been happening. I'm a track and field person. I'm also a humanities person. Maybe you've been seeing reporting around the crisis, I'm using air quotes, the humanities has been facing. I'm at ASU, where the humanities are thriving, but even we still have had to figure out how to explain the value of something that we had taken for granted and sell the study of history and literature and philosophy and our other disciplines to students and their families, to the public, and even sometimes internally. Maybe this sounds familiar, and there is a reason I'm using an academic unit as a point of comparison. Solutions to figuring out a pathway to sustainable and vibrant college Olympic and Paralympic sports do not lie in the traditional college athletic department business model, aka the football model. They exist elsewhere, and one location is within the university's academic units that have learned to articulate their value. And we, the humanities and college sports, have a shared value metric because we both provide civic and service opportunities. In other words, college Olympic sports really should be leaning into and activating the service mission of higher education as we craft solutions to ensure sustainable models for our respective sports. This is a concept, and Bubba beat me to this again, talking about the Knight Commission founding co-chairs, but this is a concept I think that Knight Commission founding co-chairs, UNC System President Bill Friday and Notre Dame President Father Theodore Hesburgh would have agreed upon. Leaning into the mission of higher education and showcasing and increasing the value of college Olympic and Paralympic sports to the communities in which they reside will open up many doors of opportunity, participation opportunities, and subsidization opportunities. This would also align the mission of college sports with the mission mandated by Congress to the USOPC and NGBs to serve both top of pyramid elite development and the massive base of grassroots participation. I am optimistic about the future. Something I have believed for a long time is that coming out from under the shadow of football absolutely will benefit women's sports and Olympic sports, but we have to act to make that happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria. And thanks all of the panelists for your really insightful remarks. You've hit on all of the issues really that we've been talking about. And it's, for me at least, it was very thoughtful and well done. I'd like to now open up the floor for questions from my colleagues around the table. And if you wouldn't mind when you raise your hand, if you have a question to clarify for whom your question is intended, that would be helpful. It is about 11:40 right now, and I think we're going to try to wrap up about 12:30. So we have plenty of time to ask questions and for you to answer them. And I think at this point, I'll open up the floor and see if Eric, would you like to go ahead?
So my question is to Rocky Harris. So I love the Olympics. As president of Penn State, I love the involvement of Penn State students in the Olympics. Obviously, there's a very special relationship between colleges and their sports programs and the Olympics. But we see this increased stress because of new financial commitments that are coming to the fore. And I view the notion of losing 32 sports as just a plain tragedy. And even at a Penn State where you have a robust athletic budget, there's pressure to eliminate sports. So my question is, what about this worries you the most? Is it the preparation of the students that are seeking to reach the podium? Is it the involvement in youth programs? What about this pressure that's resulting in decreased numbers of sport? What worries you the most about it?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that we're essentially talking about the same issues, but different ways of allocating resources. So when I was chief operating officer at Arizona State Athletics, I think we started at 56 million in revenue when I started there, and 5 or 6 years later, we're at over 100 million. And we had the same problems when we were a $56 million organization as we did at 100 million. It's a spending problem and the way you allocate your resources. So the reason why my view is because the incentive structure for investing is unsustainable. Because if you win in football, you need to invest more in it. If you lose in football, you need to invest more in it. And it's a zero-sum game. So it's a never-ending without any kind of restrictions around it. So to start off with, I think it's long overdue that athletes are getting a piece of the revenue. And now it's an exercise of how do we allocate those resources. And so the question of what I'm most concerned about, the entire ecosystem is at threat, not just in college athletics. We've seen it happen over the last 20 years in the privatization of youth sport and the limited access to opportunity. I know that Max and others who've been in sport have seen now you have to pay to play as a kid. I see it. I have 3 daughters. I refuse to participate in that, but I know that may limit their opportunities. So what's happening in college athletics is to Bubba's pyramid is the access to those opportunities are getting less. So what's more important to me is a sport ecosystem, because the involvement of the grassroots sports and allowing youth to have access to those opportunities is a bigger threat to Team USA than whether North Carolina's field hockey team fields the best athletes. It's a cause and effect to me. And I think that to me, that's where the issues are. And where the potential opportunities are. And when we look at national governing bodies, so we have about 52 of them that oversee sports. More than half of them generate less than $4 million a year. That's gross revenue. So these are very small organizations. Max runs one of the larger ones. They're the most successful Olympic program with 34 medals in Paris. And the reason why that's important is the sports that are a part of the college system, the national governing bodies they don't really have a voice in what happens in the collegiate system. They manage it from the cradle to grave. So from the time when I was the CEO of USA Triathlon, from the time a kid's little and can put on a swimsuit and run around their block and get on a bike and ride, we would turn them into a triathlete. We had a 90-year-old compete at our national championship. That's what national governing bodies do. The one place they don't have a seat at the table is within the NCAA system. So while we're talking about some solutions, one that we proposed for years is to allow the NGBs to have a seat at the table. Victoria talked about this, and her and I have had many conversations about this. They know more about their sport, how to govern it, how to monetize it. Again, most of the college sports are successful national governing bodies too. And they haven't worked in partnership. We've started to over the last 5 or 6 years, starting to harmonize college and NGBs to come up with programs that work. If you think about it, like volleyball national championship, I'm guessing 5,000, 10,000 youth compete in it, more, I'm guessing. 22 for you guys, right? So why couldn't they partner with college athletics to hold the championship in combination with that, save money, generate more income, drive more viewers, increase that database that Charlie talked about? Why aren't we working as partners? And I do think it's sport verticals that will get us there. So from my point of view, it's the entire system that needs to be looked at. And Team USA is one small part of that, but it's very visible and it's very direct. And I would say when we talk to the people that are making decisions in government, Team USA is the one thing that they want to make sure that they protect. And so that's why I think we have a seat at the table right now, and we have over the last few years.
Thank you, Rocky. Yes, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you all for being here. It's really important for us to hear your perspectives. And Bubba, this is a question for you. I certainly can appreciate the perspective that you bring to all this as a former athletic director myself. And I know that, one of the things that was compelling for you to take the job at Carolina was its broad-based athletics program. With 28 varsity sports, you're sponsoring one of the largest athletic programs at the Power 4 level. And you mentioned it in your opening that you're fortunate enough at Carolina to have the kind of support that you have from state legislators and others to allow you to continue to support those programs at the levels that people have come to expect. And that's great to hear. The hope is that the quality of the experience for everybody will maintain a high level. But my sense is that Carolina's an outlier when it comes to the pressures that people are feeling at your level, because we know that there's a hierarchy. And so how concerned are you for the other folks at your level who are going to deal with these kinds of stresses to figure out the way to support Olympic sports in this era of the House settlement and these things. And also, one of the things that we've all come to appreciate, and I don't think it gets enough attention, especially when we're talking about the Olympic movement and medals and incentives around that, is how sport has the ability to bring young people together from such vastly different lived experiences, to ride the bus together, to sit in the locker room and cry together after a tough loss, to celebrate together on the field or on the ice or on the track, to come to appreciate what we all bring to our experiences in college that will help inform us as we go into this very fractured, divisive world that they're going to walk into. And how much do you feel like that needs to be considered along with the other considerations that we're talking about today with respect to success at the Olympic level and getting athletes on the podium?
Well, that's certainly a great question, I think. It was a lot. And I think we'll try to weave all this together. But before I do, I want to go back to what Max said at the very beginning. I mean, Max, that was probably the best humble brag I've ever heard. I mean, We had Howard, we had Notre Dame, we had Georgetown, we had law school. I mean, my kids, I mean, they tell me all the time that they've been swimming in the shallow end of the gene pool. They have none of those experiences. And so congratulations to what you have going on. But Peter, you hit on probably 4 or 5 different topics that I think are really perfect for this conversation. The Olympic movement, the high-end sports, whether it was Penn State or Florida State, of trying to compete for national championships in football. And then what Victoria was talking about is not only the integration of some of the sports into the academy that was talked about earlier with Charlie's discussion earlier about the new Division I model. All of those things are pieces that we should be examining and trying to pull apart and then put back together. The courts have told us that we're going in a different direction. For the last 30 or 40 years, we've been revenue sharing. We've created revenue as a university and shared it across all the other sports that play. Football and basketball supported everybody else. The courts are now saying that model's not the economic model of the future. If you generate it, you get it. That's the pro model. Now, there's not very many. I've worked at 4 different universities, and I added this up a while ago. There were 94 sports at those 4 universities. 4 of them made more money than we spent. Football and basketball at Notre Dame, football and basketball at Carolina. Every sport at Ball State, every sport at Tulsa lost money. They were subsidized by the university. But I think when the first Knight Commission came out, I think that the thought was you should be able to support your athletic program. I think we missed that last line of the report that said, but it's okay to subsidize it if you don't, because it's important to what we do. And so when Charlie's developing this Division I model, it is much more sports specific. It is going to have fewer people. It will be fewer layers, but you'll have to be an expert in your area. And that model is likely to talk about everything from playing rules to competition. And I think the integration of people in that ecosystem of that particular sport will help the Olympics. I'm a part of the USTA AD advisory group. The USTA, the NCAA, and the ITA get together annually and talk about tennis and how those things all fit together, from youth sports to college sports to pro sports. And I think that's a really good model that we should start to think about as we move forward, because I think that really is the future of where we're headed. And then the other thing you talked about, I think the thing that, as you mentioned, brings us all together is sports. It really does bring community together. It brings the team together. And so those lessons learned that Charlie talked about, and I thought he did a great job of talking about all the great things that sports does for the individual, but it's a great thing for the community. It brings our communities together. And I do think it starts at the youth level. And so how do we tie the youth level, because it has been privatized and there's a lot of money in the youth market. As we pulled educational funding out at the elementary school and the high school level, PE programs went away, art programs went away, all the co-curricular activities went away. So I do think private investment in some kind of subsidy or some kind of support for those sports are going to be important, because the football and basketball money is going to sit in football and basketball. And I think we just have to talk about a different funding model, because I do think it's important for all of us to think about it from the youth sport all the way to the pro model. What's it look like in the United States? Because it's different today than it was 30 years ago.
Your answer might have been shorter than Peter's question. So that's a first. Other questions from Christine? Thank you.
Yes, questions for Jaime. You mentioned your work with the Intercollegiate Coaches Association Coalition and trying to protect the resources going forward by kind of codifying the percentages that are spent on the different categories of sport. How do you see that playing out? And especially if institutional or conference leaders say, we don't want, as you mentioned, we don't need these guardrails. We should have our own autonomy to spend the resources as we see fit.
So excuse me, I'd like to maybe play a little bit off of Rocky's statement where this is a spending problem. I don't believe that we have a revenue problem. When we see the overall budgets expanding in the way that Rocky mentioned, even at Arizona State, I'll use an example. Just the coaching staff, not all the support staff, but just the coaching staff at Ohio State. that salary pool is more than the coaching salary pool at the Cleveland Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals combined. So it's two professional teams whose coaching salaries are higher than. And it's no different in other parts of business or higher education. We have some bloat here. And so as we look at how do we correct in this new revenue space or this new financial space with student athletes receiving revenue, which I fully support, we do need to think about what are our priorities here. And if broad-based sponsorship of sports is a priority, then we need to have structure around there to support it and to guide us in that direction. And so that's something that all of the coaches associations, it's, at a time in our culture where it's hard to get people to agree on things, this is one thing that everybody's agreeing on. When I took this position, I had no intent to make the number of trips to Washington, D.C. That I have, along with my colleagues. And the people in D.C. that we speak with share this concern. And I don't think that some of our solutions, at least conceptually, are that objectable. To say that we've continued to, or we've done this, let's continue to work in that direction. And our society also responds to crisis, whether it would be the financial crisis or the housing crisis or healthcare. We do a great job of when there's a problem, we respond to it. I think this is an opportunity with strong leadership to be able to be proactive in that space. And I think that's what we're seeing around with the ICAC, with coaches associations, with heads of NGBs, people that are at this table, is that they recognize the problem. And the application of the solutions are not going to be easy. But also President Baker just shared this whole very complex structure to make sure that the revenue share and that NIL is legitimate. And we've got, Deloitte in this space. I mean, that is tremendously complex. I don't see how we don't apply some of that same intention to make sure that the structure for broad-based sports sponsorship isn't in place as well.
Thanks very much. Jill, thank you.
Well, no follow-up. Kevin Blue has done a magnificent job talking about the spending issue. And it really, we do have a fundamentally flawed system in higher education relative to our revenue sports. Kevin, I just think it's been fantastic. There's no owner's equity. So there's no incentive to create, quote unquote, a profit to pay somewhere else. But I think that's part of the economic challenge that we need to take a look at as we move forward. And that might be part of the sport specific modeling that we have to take a look at.
Yeah, last night at dinner, Kevin walked us through some of his thoughts. So it is a different way of thinking about the economic model. Jill, thanks.
So I'm going to take the prerogative of the mic to make a comment about something Mr. Cunningham said, and then I'm going to ask Max a question. However, in order to do that, I want to give some context. So my name's Jill Pilgrim. I'm a former track and field athlete at the junior high school, and college level. I was general counsel of USA Track and Field. I was general counsel of Ladies Professional Golf. I'm currently a member of the board of the Athletics Integrity Unit, which oversees all the integrity issues for the sport of track and field worldwide and prosecutes infractions. I'm a sports attorney based in New York City, and on a panel, I'm a notice arbitrator for the NFL's drug testing policies. Mr. Cunningham, what I wanted to say to you in your pyramid, I think you could expand the women who go pro in sports category to include all the women who are working professionally in the sports industry, such as myself and many of the women in this room, because there are compared to 45 years ago when I started and I knew the 10 women, now I can't count them on my on my hands how many women are working in sports as a profession who were collegiate athletes. So, Max, what I wanted to ask you about is obviously USA Track and Field it leads the world, as we've noted, in the Olympic medal count and is a premier national governing body of Olympic sport in the United States. We're about to have an Olympics in LA in 28, and we've been talking about this whole conundrum that we're dealing with declining support from the college and university context for the Olympic sports. So, and you suggested it in your comments, but what do you envision or recommend that NGB should do to advocate for and support maintaining Olympic sports within the college and university setting?
Thank you for the question. And I know that Jill can relate to the fact that in our sport, to collaborate with partners, you have to demonstrate that you add value. Our sport is very diverse in discipline, interests, stakeholders have different agendas. And so we've had to take a look at how do we engage with different stakeholders and make it make sense to grow, again, the resource and support the sports. So there are a few things that have resonated over the last few years. We embarked upon a very ambitious goal of hosting the World Championships here in the United States for the first time that we did in Eugene, Oregon. It took many years of pitching, not to bring up Vin Lanana again, but it was a vision that he shared, building a world-class stadium, engaging national, state, local communities to subsidize that. And then to have a visionary like Phil Knight say, hey, how do we use this as a catalyst to generate excitement in the sport, in the nation, and how do we use this facility on a university campus for a long time? We had to get creative to have a long-term vision on engagement. Some of the things that came out of that have carried over and resonated on seeing the passion in the sport vertical and how to support it was, first of all, we looked at the campaign that we ran during the World Championships was all things led to Eugene, Oregon. So across the country, engaging youth sports to have the Junior Olympics on that campus where the athletes from around the world that they admired competed was a way that we could reach out in every single community where we had Olympians and really get some kind of energy, excitement, reposition the sport and get people excited about participating. On the local level, it galvanized participation. We could engage with local and regional sponsors to support those programs. One of the things that grew out of that, we're in discussion with a number of universities right now. Facility access is always challenging for us, facility usage. We did, one of our elite meets on one of the major college campuses and navigating through recreation that manages this facility rather than the track team that manages the facility was a challenge, but we paid significant use fees for that. And we brought, our NBC broadcast partner to both, elevate that campus. Through those discussions, we realized that, our podium coaches that are both in the collegiate space and our professional coaches also inspire our high school coaches, our middle school coaches. So we're also in discussions with some universities right now in the camps and clinic space. One athletic director last week said, this is amazing. We're trying to reimagine the camp experience for our young people. And we're situated in a part of the country where we don't get a lot of traffic. So if you can bring a Jackie Joyner-Kersee or Noah Lyles to a camp and we suddenly get kids on our campus that would never visit the university, our coaches can recruit and they can take a look at the university. And so, we're trying to be innovative in those things. President Baker mentioned, the digital platform. We launched in 2013 before streaming was as popular, our digital platform, and we produced the first high schooler to do a 4-minute mile. And within a week, we had 500,000 views. That helped us realize a couple things. It helped me reshape my media partnership with my broadcast network because I said, hey, there's real engagement here. It also told us that flying under the radar is this really passionate sports fan that we needed to access to. And again, we could monetize it. Another thing about sustaining it is for years, we've had to work with colleges and universities with athletes who could not receive the benefit of prize money, whether it was expenses. We're thinking through, can we do NIL deals to help athletes post their collegiate season, get to international competitions? And then the other thing that I think that we've been really fortunate with our sports science and high performance department was we partnered with the USOPC. I went out and filed seed money for our team, and we developed this thing called the Talent Protection Program. And we realized that many of our athletes peak after they get out of college, but they didn't have the support until they could develop into a medal potential Olympian. That program now has 70 post-collegiate athletes that get a salary, that get support, mental health, nutrition, sports science. We've produced medals out of that program that is co-funded, but it was another point of engagement where we could take people who are coming out of the college system, have them engage in a natural way with the NGB, demonstrate that there's value both to that sport and that there were people on the commercial side that would support it. And we see that as an opportunity to grow across the country. The last thing I'll say is what's really critical working with our coaches association, with Sam Seams and the like, is to try to coordinate the competition calendar. We have the collegiate championships that butt up against our international competitions. And then what we've also found was we really were able to work closely with the NCAA over the last couple of years about rules alignment. What you compete in collegiately is not really legal internationally. So does it affect your world ranking points? So to me, to start the engagement and the conversation has to be organic for it to be sustainable. But I think through those conversations, we are able to advocate for the sport, talk about the importance of it. And then for me, it's being entrepreneurial. Again, if you can navigate the governance side of whether it's the higher education institution or the NGB, you can be a little bit innovative in terms of bringing in corporate support. And Bubba mentioned this. I'm getting more calls now from private equity. We have one of the most robust youth participation with our feeder system with hundreds of thousands of kids that are going through. The last thing I'll say is even on the youth side, our run, jump, throw program that's had over 1 million kids is funded by the Hershey Company. So if we think outside the box, start from the bottom all the way up, I think there are natural ways to collaborate to supplement the funds that are coming in.
Very, very interesting. Thank you, Max. Beth.
Yeah, question, Victoria, for you, and I appreciate the candor of the panel. I love it. Victoria, you mentioned your moonshot, which you've written about, and I've read about the value of a federal tax on sports betting and how that could bring a new funding source to Olympic sports. And I've read your work, but I would love to hear you sort of talk about how you think this tax could actually be implemented and how you think it could support Olympic sports.
Thanks for the question. I just, I'm out on a run and cooking up ideas, and then sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And this was one that I think stuck. This moonshot idea that, we could tax something new, sports betting, which is pretty controversial and has some pretty awful parts, as Charlie Baker was saying, especially with the prop bets. But it's here, right? And again, not thinking about the United States in a vacuum, it's been everywhere else for a while, or most other places for a while. So I think that's important context too. So what can we do with this thing? It's a sports thing. Well, let's tax it. And, we've heard a couple of times today that, this is the only country that doesn't have federal funding of its sports programs and Olympic development. But a lot of federal monies go through colleges. And so there's indirect federal funding of Olympic development, I would say. So this could be one resource to continue to move federal monies through higher education to support Olympic and Paralympic development in the way that it's mandated by Congress, which is an and both, top of pyramid elite development and those broad-based participation opportunities. It turns out this tax already exists. So I wasn't cooking up something new. I first learned this wonderful news from Andrew Cooper, so I need to give credit where it's due. Andrew Cooper is the CEO, I think that's his title, of the United College Athletes Association, and he had testified recently before a House subcommittee. And then the wonderful Peyton Barish, I have to give a second shout out to Peyton in the room, did additional research to find what this federal excise tax actually is. So we could go into the history, but it's been around and hasn't really been activated until recently. And it's generating a lot of revenue. So it's a 0.25% tax. And in 2024, this pot of money was estimated to be $370 million. Again, not my research, Peyton's. So blame him. No, I'm just kidding. Credit him. I'm sure it's accurate. So that's a big pot of money. But I think thinking outside the box about federal funds going through institutions of higher education is a good starting point. And this is one pot of money that could contribute to that. One additional pot of money. So I'm constantly, the wheels are always churning. Charlie Baker reminded me of another weird idea I had on a run, which I think actually might also stick to, but we've got to show the value to them. And that is international federations and the IOC. Charlie Baker was talking earlier today about how the NCAA swimming national championships are an Olympic Games, and that there's so many international Olympians competing at that meet. And we need to do a better job of selling that because there's so much interest within the US to watch Olympic swim dive. Those international federations are dependent upon the American college sports system. And those other national Olympic committees are dependent upon the American college sports system. So how do we show the value to them to invest in this as well, is what Charlie's comments reminded me of. So I'll keep looking for more pots of money and come and bring them to you.
Thank you. Charles?
Well, thank you, all five of you, for being here today. Rocky, I'd like to kind of piggyback off the question asked by my colleague, but if these new funding sources are available to the USOPC, how could those funds potentially be used to strengthen and support at-risk collegiate Olympic sports and or support collegiate broad-based programs?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I would love to see the money flow directly to the national governing bodies. That would actually be a better, more efficient way of allocating those resources if there's additional federal funding. And the reason why I say that is they know how to spend the money that they want to spend. We do allocate grants to them every year, so we could go through that process too. But my preference is to have the money flow directly to national governing bodies, since they're looking at their entire sport ecosystem within their sport and the best way to grow it versus us dictating how to grow it at a more of a local or direct level. To what Victoria said has always resonated with me, and her and I are both runners, and we do think a lot on runs, and we talk frequently about this. This goes to Bubba's like Rubik's Cube, right? We need a comprehensive solution to a complex problem. And yes, federal funding is one potential solution. There's also state funding that universities already get. There could be targeted funding directly to athletics that they restrict to that. There's also money savings that could be driven through athletics. In Colorado, California, Utah, there's state legislation that was passed. It gives all Team USA athletes in-state tuition. So that would decrease the budget so I think we have to look at this as there's restrictions we can put on, there's federal funding, there's state funding, and there's different ways to allocate resources. And I think we have to look at all of that and say, okay, how do we think about this instead of looking at one piece of the cube, looking at the whole. And I do find it peculiar, and maybe this is provocative for me to say, that college athletics is willing to put restrictions on athletes, from roster limits to how much they can earn, but they're not willing to put restrictions on themselves. And I think that is to me, if we want to get to the core of the issue, that's the core of the issue. And so I think we have to look at funding, but we also have to look at, why are we okay with restricting athletes from earnings, from opportunities, but we're not concerned about putting caps around spending or requirements about, I think, the proportion of, how we currently spend our money to making sure that gets invested into Olympic sport. Like, it's, to me, it's just funny when we talk about this, that, okay, deregulation, except when I would have to make a hard decision. And so I think that we have to just be honest with ourselves, and that we don't want to solve the real problem, because the real problem takes power away from few instead of giving it to the many. And so I do think, yes, federal funding would be great. I'd love to see it go to colleges and universities. I'd love to see it go to national governing bodies. But I do think there's a bigger solution here. And I do think we have enough smart people actually in this room who could come up with a proposal that the federal government, that we could get behind and supporting.
I'd like to just comment on the question, and I think it's important because there's no doubt there is a strong connection between the Olympic movement and broad-based sports sponsorship, but they're not necessarily the same. And I would just maybe add another thought to Rocky's take of, hey, if we have this massive gambling pool of money that can go to help support this initiative, if it goes to the NGBs, what Max is incentivized to do is win medals, is have podiums. And so it would make sense in his efforts to push that money towards the University of Arkansas. The wrestling NGB would send it to Penn State because of their regional training center, and that's where the majority of their Olympians are coming from. But where we are seeing the threats are at places like Cleveland State, who has dropped wrestling. And they may not be producing large number of podiums, but they are producing large number of first-time college students. And those are the things. So I'll add in, or since nobody asked, the coaches associations would be happy to take that money and allocate it out. So just wanted to make that punch.
I do want to add to what Jamie said about the threat to, I'd say, the group of five, the non-power schools. That, again, as we think about a comprehensive solution to this, that group's really a threat because they have to compete, or they feel like they're not living up to their job as athletics directors, as people running these sports. So they're actually a bigger threat to those sports being impacted than it is in the bigger schools, the power schools. And so I think we have to think about, is there a solution that allows them to opt into house without all the requirements? Can we think about this differently so they don't have to restrict opportunities just to be able to participate? And so I think we have to also think about the schools that don't generate the most, because 90% of the money that comes from the college football playoffs go to 4 conferences, right? So as we talk about Victoria spreading that money around, it's a small group who's getting access to that money anyways. So I just think we have to think about, I know we when we voted back in the day to kind of make the autonomous 5 separate rules, and we could come up with our own, the group of 5 are being impacted because their revenues aren't growing as quickly, or even some it's going backwards. And so I think we have to think about Division I FBS is not one group. And I think that we could come up with some pretty unique solutions to making sure the schools without the big budgets can continue to field broad-based sports.
Yeah, I did want to respond a little bit. We have had caps, on how we operate. But that's what's gotten us in legal challenges. We've capped the number of coaches, the number of events, the number of sports, the number of scholarships. All of those are what put us in the position we're in today. So I think is what we really need to think about is what is that new model that fits the legal environment today that also allows for competition. I mean, the competition for resources, we think, is directly related to your success in competition on the field. And I think the same is true when you think about the Olympics. We're trying to get more resources to the USOPC so that we can be more successful nationally. That whole thing works at the collegiate level as well. So is there a space for two sports that generate a lot of money at a handful of schools? And then what is the economic model for everybody else? And how do we support that?
Thank you. Max, did you want to add a comment?
Yeah, the comment that I have is that my revenue model is different. So I'm not incentivized by medals per se. Most of there's a big portion that goes in high performance, but there are 45 million people in this country that run. And so my supporters want to connect people from a lifestyle standpoint. I use some of the money I generate from my lifestyle sponsors, my grassroots sponsors to fund high performance programs. So if you look at the youth-based run, jump, throw program, it's about getting kids active. It's about leadership skills. There's corporate support, but there's margin that we then shift over to our high performance department. So the reason I say that is because the medals are the most visible, but as an NGB, we're cradle to the grave. Other sponsorship is, our masters athletes who have the most disposable income and the most influential industry leaders, and they're about, full scale development. So I think the broad-based opportunities to participate in sport are equally as important. And the most visible ones are the inspiration. They inspire the next generation of leaders. They inspire people to participate. So I think if we looked at it from that vantage point, those are the value propositions for people that are not so obvious and probably aren't discussed as much.
Kendall?
Thanks, Pam. Bubba, I'm going to go back to you for this one. In a media appearance, I know you recently discussed the need for a new type of arrangement that is akin to collective bargaining, where schools and conferences could potentially negotiate with players over benefits and rules that apply within their sports. My question is, do you think this is needed exclusively in sports like football and basketball, or would you see this type of new system where athletes become sort of co-determinants of their experience, benefiting collegiate Olympic sports as well?
Yeah, I don't know if it would apply beyond football and basketball, but I do think that's probably where we should start. When I'm thinking of the 75, 15, 5, 5 model that's out there, that I think for us, as I've been told by many attorneys, that we're in violation of antitrust. There's only two ways to not be in violation: collectively bargain or get a federal antitrust exemption. So it seems to me that the ability to get a federal antitrust exemption seems pretty rare. So that's why my position has moved toward, why don't we try to collectively bargain? If we do that, let's try to get a very narrow exemption that those student athletes would not be considered employees, and see if something like that could possibly work. And to me, it was, let's start somewhere to see if we can make some progress. I don't think we can design the end product immediately, but if we can think it, and I think it was a great question of Charlie earlier, what should we look like in 10 years? And then let's try to figure out a path to get there. And that was at least one step along the path in my mind.
Thank you, Bubba. I think we have maybe time for one more question, one or two more questions. We're getting close to the end here. So, John?
Thanks, Pam. So, Jamie, this is a question for you, and you've touched on some of this already, but I would like you to expand a little bit. So we've been hearing different nomenclature about different groups of sports, revenue versus non-revenue or Olympic sports. What's the best way to identify the college sports that you're concerned about and why? And when you talk about the why, you've mentioned opportunities, for example. I'm wondering if you could say more about the educational aspects of these sports.
That's a good question. I think the concerns apply to everyone. So in that list of 32 includes of sports that have been dropped includes Utah, and so Power 4 dropping beach volleyball, or a school like Grand Canyon that dropped men's volleyball that was just in the Final Four the year before. So I think the impacts and the threats are kind of, to everyone. I see concerns, as Rocky shared, becoming exponentially greater as you move into the group of five, because of this, in all honesty, an attempt to be something that they're structurally not built to be. So if revenue share is available to everyone, but as Bubba shared, the places that he's administered, only 4 programs have made money. Yet we're going to have a lot of programs that share revenue. And we'll see it in volleyball. And we're fortunate that there's only one women's sport in the Power 4 that makes any net revenue. That's the University of Nebraska's women's volleyball program. So in that same structure, they're probably the only ones that should be receiving that. Yet that won't be the case. So I think the pressures in there to, again, try to compete at something that I'm not. And I also think it exists. I mean, it exists in the ACC. There's no doubt that there's other, conference institutions that are going to try to get to that 20 plus million that aren't structurally capable of doing that. And we'll see that all over. And again, those pressures and those incentives, yes, they impact the opportunity side, but they absolutely impact the educational impact of these young people coming through. And I don't think it's any different than if, as a president or a chancellor, you look at all of your academic offerings and say, you know what, the ones that and the classes that make us money are English 101 and our college algebra and things like that. But my 400 level neuroscience class is not creating revenue. Well, I don't just cut that off. I find ways to make that work. So I think, again, in this complex situation, there are plenty of models that we can use and apply to this that then helps those opportunities, those educational experiences, and the people that will be at this table 2 decades from now, that have the athletic experience and the real life experiences that President Baker referred to, earlier on. So I'm not sure if that quite addresses, but.
I want to add to that I think that's one of our competitive advantages too, is that we look at athletes as holistic athletes, and we see the system we have teaching them more than just we don't put them in programs when they're 5 and say you're a tennis player for life. And I think that gives us a real competitive advantage that other countries are looking to, because our system is the envy of the world. And part of that is that it's integrated and it's not separating sport from education and the human experience. And we're even seeing that at the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, where we value competitive excellence and athlete well-being on equal plane. And that we believe that's our competitive advantage going forward too. So I think the system here is set up for us to have success, as Jill mentioned, to be successful leaders in our country, but also to be successful athletes. The well-rounded athlete, the holistic athlete, is a successful human and a successful athlete. So
yeah. Victoria?
Sorry, do we have time for me to just jump in really fast?
Sure.
I think looking at the messy work that's in front of us, one thing we should be thinking about is recognizing and acknowledging and accepting that we've made some mistakes and that they're not set in stone, but we can correct that and admit we made a mistake. I'm the experiment of coast to coast mega conferences in sports that play many games per week. I don't know if that experiment is serving students in those sports well. I'm biased. I'm a Pac-12 person, but that was the best Olympic sport conference in the world. It was the best sports league for U23 athletes in the world in many sports. And, we could talk about, well, a sports minister maybe could have intervened and said, you can create mega conferences for football, but maybe we shouldn't for these other sports, and these need to stay local and regional. But we're talking about higher ed right now. And I don't think a sports minister outside of higher ed is the person who could have called that out. I think higher ed needs to own some of this. And, you know, just thinking about this question about education, I don't know if, and earlier we were talking about how the transfer portal has wreaked havoc on academics. These mega conferences are doing that as well. All that said, that the students, I have faith in the students, but we shouldn't have made their conditions worse to balance and navigate academic and athletic roles and responsibilities. We're supposed to make it more seamless. And again, I'm sure they're doing great, but I'd like to do better by them.
Thanks very much. I think we're going to have to, I as the chair, I have the prerogative of doing two things. One, maybe asking a really hard question at the end and then bringing us to a close. We didn't have enough time, it turns out, but that's I think a hallmark of a very good session. So one of the things that I wanted to just float out there, and I guess Bubba, Jamie, or anyone can chime in if you can do it in less than a minute. What do you think that college athletics will look like in the next 5 years? And what do you wish for it to look like?
Under a minute. Do you want me to explain the meaning of life as well and project that?
You can do it under a minute.
No, I mean, I will just say my hope is that it looks very similar to the way that it does now. We have this model that Rocky has referenced as being envious of the world, and we need to make sure that we're continuing to protect that and maintain that. So that's my hope, and that it continues to be elevated because of all of the financial advantages that we're seeing in this space.
Really similar. I think if I look 5 to 10 years, I think we'll probably have a bifurcated system. I do think that football, basketball, maybe a handful of others will be compensated. I think we'll have to navigate the collective bargaining or however we're going to agree on what that compensation level looks like. And we're going to have a whole group of sports that are going to be subsidized by a different funding model. And as long as we have broad-based participation, I think I could get comfortable with the bifurcated system of a compensated model and a subsidized model.
Okay, thank you. Well, we need to come to a close, and I hope that you'll all join me in thanking this really amazing panel for coming in and being so candid and providing your perspective. So thank you so much. I do want to just mention too that we're going to continue this discussion on June 10th at the NACTA convention, where we will host a session titled Protecting Collegiate Olympic Sports, an interactive session on what comes next. And it's open to any NACTA convention attendee and will also be available virtually. And we will be posting information about that. I think the registration will open soon and we'll post information. So thank you all again to those who attended these sessions. We will have our sessions available on the nightcommission.org website, and I wish you all a great day. Thank you.